Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. I am Elisa Forneray, and I am here welcoming you to Griever's Guide to Family Dynamics, an event hosted by EOL's Wander Community. The Wander Community is a space to gather as we all navigate grief. And through Wander, I host this monthly event along with another monthly series called Grief Support to convene leaders and professionals in the death and grief spaces. So the audiences like y'all who are here tonight watching or watching this recording can feel actively supported as you move through life after a death-related loss. So as I said, I am Elisa Forneray. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a convener, a consultant, and an educator working in the grief space. And I got into this work in 2016 after my own mom died. And ever since, I have really been focused on actively working to amplify the resources and works of people like our guests here today. Just a couple of things before we get started. I am operating my business, representing EOL and Wander here today on Kauai and Tongva land in Western and Southern California. And I am here tonight in acknowledgement of that privilege that I have. I can hear the animals running over the roof of my house. I can see the trees growing outside of my windows, even in the dark tonight. And I am just incredibly grateful for this space. And we're gonna throw a link in the chat. Jillian, our amazing behind the scenes support person from Round Glasses here. We'll throw a link in the chat where you can learn more about the space that you're taking up. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat that we will answer throughout. So you'll only see us here on the screen tonight, but you can ask questions through the chat directly to me, or you can ask using the Q&A feature. This video will be available as a recording after, and you'll be able to find all of the information about our guests and panelists tonight in an email that we'll send out from me, that I'll send out after this to everyone joining and everyone in our group. So last but not least, we're here tonight to talk about managing family dynamics, particularly at this time of year, particularly as the year ends, as the holidays come up, as things get challenging, as we start seeing people more. I really wanted to have this conversation because I think that there are a lot of complexities around how we navigate honoring our own grief in the space that we need for our grief, as well as the interactions that we have with our families while we're navigating our grief and their grief. So I have three guests with me tonight who are here to offer wisdom and just a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to introduce each of them. Jillian will be putting links to their work and upcoming events and places that you can find them in the chat. But don't worry, if you want to click stuff, that's fine, but we will also be sending it all around after. So first, I'm going to start with Tita. So Tita is an end-of-life doula, community educator, and grief activist. She is the co-founder of MESO, which is dedicated to providing resources and support for immigrants and their families at the intersection of heritage, culture, care, loss, and grief. Tita is the American-born daughter of Thai immigrants who immigrated in the mid-60s, and she's produced many community education events and is really passionate about the innovative peer support group that she founded and facilitates currently called Grief, the Loss of Your Immigrant Parent. In honor of her deceased parents, that work is done. So Tita lives in Northern California with her spouse, two teenagers, and a dog. And she loves exploring local farmers markets wherever she is, listening to BTS, which I love, Tita, and eating really good food. Tia, the question that I want to propose to you after, or to offer to you after introducing you with your formal bio is, who are you here honoring tonight, and who comes up for you when you think about navigating family dynamics in terms of grief?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Elisa. I'm here to honor my parents. Dr. Ananta and Patimara Sikampol. You mentioned them in my bio, And I was really called to this work after they passed away in 2019 in two very different ways, 5 weeks apart. It was very, very challenging, traumatic, and I was completely unprepared pretty much for everything. And then I think that out of that experience, as I unpacked that through my grief, and just came to various realizations about the ways that they died and how that has impacted the way that I've been grieving and the world that I've been grieving in. I've come to understand a little bit that that much of their immigrant status, actually in their 50 years living here in America, influenced that entire experience and actually followed them into their deaths as well. And to my great surprise, has actually followed me as a second generation daughter in my grief. And so I do a lot of work around that, and I'm here to honor them. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing them into this space. I really appreciate that and your vulnerability. So thank you, Tita. Thank you for being here. Next is Jana DeCristofaro, is the Community Response Program Coordinator at the Dougy Center for Grieving Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. On staff since 2002, she coordinates peer grief support groups for children, teens, young adults, and adults. She also provides consultation and training for grieving families, students, community members, and professionals locally and nationally. She is the host and producer of the incredible podcast, Grief Out Loud, run by the Dougy Center, and she completed her BA in sociology at Wake Forest and her MSW at Portland State. So we are throwing your links in the chat, but I'd like to pose the same question to you. Who are you here honoring tonight, especially when it comes to thinking about family and family dynamics and grief?
Well, thanks, Elisa, again, for including me on this panel and this conversation tonight with everyone who's tuning in out there. And I would say I am always honoring the thousands of kids and teens and young adults who have had the courage to come and sit in a room with me and share about their experiences with grief and the people that they miss and the people they had very complicated relationships with, and all the ways that grief has affected and shaped their current and past experiences. But personally, I think I'd like to bring some folks into the room with me, and that is almost my entire extended, very Italian American, New York, East Coast family, because Thanksgiving makes me think of them. My grandparents, Philip and Josephine, died when I was in high school, about a year apart, and my aunt died about 10 years ago, and her wife died just this last May. And those were kind of the core people that we spent a lot of our Thanksgivings with growing up in Brooklyn. And then also on my dad's side, my grandmother, Millie, who died about 2 years ago. And so when I think about Thanksgiving, particularly of this time of year, I think about Italians doing it very differently, and all the dynamics that come with that of being in small houses in New York City, and a lot of yelling and a lot of tenderness in the yelling, and more yelling and crying, and just all of the elevated dynamics that come from being in a immigrant Italian American family. So I'm thinking of all of them and all of the non-traditional meals and foods that we shared together. So
thank you. I think yelling is a part of it all. I really appreciate that. And I thank you for bringing your grandmother, you said, Millie, who died 2 years ago. My grandmother, Millie, also died 2 years ago around this time of year. Mm-hmm. And I want to bring her into the room. And I thank you for doing that. Not a lot of yelling there, but definitely a strong energy. So I'm going to bring her in too. Thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. And last but not least, TJ. TJ Jackson is no stranger to music. With a legendary last name, he is the son of Tito and nephew of Janet and Michael Jackson. He has an impressive music career of his own as a proven global star and multi-platinum selling artist. TJ and his brothers formed the group 3T and became an international success. Today, TJ has embarked on a triumphant solo career and is continuously releasing music to his fans. And in addition to that music and that work, TJ is also passionate about his family's inspirational brand he runs with his wife called The Family Rules. And TJ is the co-founder of a 501c3 nonprofit, which he started with his brothers in 2015 in memory of their late mother, Dee Dee Jackson. The Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, we're throwing links in the chat, where DDJF focuses on loss and grief and how to navigate through it. So TJ, last but not least, question to you: who are you bringing into this space tonight and honoring?
That's a pretty easy question, because that's definitely my mother. I had just turned 16 when my mother was murdered, and she was my entire world. And I've been blessed to have a family that's been there for me, supporting me in the struggles that obviously come after that event. And it's still a challenge, though. I think sometimes we think that because it happened so long ago, that I don't hurt or I don't go through pain. But I have kids of my own, and there's many moments where I'm thinking about what their grandmother would be like, or the help the grandmother would provide. It can get challenging. But yes, the other thing I would like to say is, just because I come from a famous family doesn't mean that I don't hurt like everyone else. And we go through similar struggles dealing with grief, and we don't get a pass when it comes to that. So I'm happy to just be here and just let people know that they're not alone. Whatever you're going through, there's most likely someone else out there that's going through the similar situation, and just to provide hope and inspiration to anyone out there.
Thank you.
You are more than welcome.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think one of the things I know that comes up, particularly at the holidays for a lot of people, is that sense of isolation, whether it's from everyone else who's celebrating and having a wonderful time at this time of year, or people who you can talk to about certain things during the time of year, but this time of year just gets really challenging. So I think that I just really appreciate you bringing that into this space and making it feel like we can all accept that, yes, we might be going through something, but we're not always alone in it, and that isolation can be met with some compassion. So thank you. So I'm going to ask some questions. Everyone is really welcome. Again, like I said, throw questions in the chat, send them in the Q&A. But the question that I want to open up to all of you to start tonight is, and I don't know, I'm going to start pretty vulnerable. What are some of the things that you have witnessed or experienced when it gets to this time of year and you find your grief bubbling up? I think, I wanted to start with this question tonight, particularly because it can feel isolating. I had a really good cry today. I know people are going to have really big cries and things like that over the next couple of weeks due to grief. So in terms of like how you're experiencing grief in your relationship with yourself or your family, I'd love to hear where that starts coming up as we start moving into this holiday season. And y'all can hit it, just anybody. It's open to the floor.
I guess I can go first. For me, it's a bit different, because even I lost my Uncle Michael 12 years ago, and Thriller is a song that plays all throughout Halloween. So, you can't escape that day without thinking of a significant loss. In my situation, everyone's partying and having a good time, but for me, it reminds me of my uncle. And I think one important thing that I've learned that can help is just trying to reframe difficult moments like that into a celebration, just to celebrate the person and what they meant. Obviously, birthdays or important dates, Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever is an important date that reminds you of that person and the loss. I think if we can try to figure a way to reframe that as a celebration and honoring of that person, usually helps. Um, but truthfully, I don't know if I'm the best to answer this question because, like I said, I've had a lot of practice. I have to hear my uncle on the radio and see his pictures and stuff everywhere. So that's a constant reminder. So for me, I'm kind of used to dealing with reminders, and that could be difficult, if that makes sense. But what's helped me, like I said, is just being able to reframe, um, just to reframe the tragic behind of how you lose someone into a celebration of their lives.
Let's see. So Elisa, I'm not used to talking about my own grief, right? As I'm always here representing the stories of the children and the families that I work with. But let me see what I can talk about from a personal perspective. I think something I think a lot about around grief, holidays, and family dynamics is I think about being someone who's queer and having relatives who are queer and folks who have someone in their life who dies, who's part of the queer community or trans community, and how there can be a lot that comes up around family dynamics in terms of if it was someone in your life who died and they're trans and you go visit your family and the family is using not the name that that person used, not the right pronoun. There's just so many layers of extra grief and strife. And so I think about from so many of my friends in the world who there's grief of having had someone die, but there's also grief of not being able to be present with their family in the way that they want to, or be received by their family in the way that they want to. And thankfully that was not my experience, but I do know from my aunt and her wife who were together for 40 plus years, there was a lot of strife in some of the generations of our family with them and their relationship. And that when they died, like not really being able to ever there, I don't really know how to say it, but I just think about that idea of how many years they spent not being fully received for what their relationship was. And so that's like another layer of grief. And so that's who I'm always thinking a lot about, as people who are maybe treading into some family dynamics that can be really painful and hurtful, connected to grief and also to identity in that way.
My parents, when my grief bubbles up, particularly around the holidays, and for me, it's been a little bit strange because since my parents did die in like the fall of 2019, I was kind of very new into it when COVID actually began, and so when I experience kind of like, again, like these waves of grief as related to my parents, I also kind of understand that there are times when I feel like it's been a little bit muted because I just haven't been able to kind of like bust out in my grief because of COVID, perhaps the way that I may have wanted to, had it not been a COVID world. So I'm always kind of a little like puzzled by it. And when I think of my parents, particularly now, like with the holidays, and they had immigrated to America in the mid 60s, and they actually really never adopted any kind of traditions within America. And so particularly like with Thanksgiving, I mean, my brother and I, we didn't grow up with a turkey. It was just kind of like, all right, same old Thai food. and there wasn't, there wasn't in terms of the presence of American culture, like within my house, it was like some version of like 1960s Thailand, and outside it was actually, modern day America. And so in terms of this notion of kind of like code switching between these two environments, and particularly around the holidays, and not really understanding anything of what was going on around Thanksgiving or Christmas. I mean, we didn't have Christmas. So that's some of actually what comes up for me around the holidays now. With my parents gone, there's been a lot of exploration on my part of identity. And with the notion of trying to understand, for me, what does it mean to be Asian in America? particularly, now, and what does that mean in terms of Thanksgiving and the history of this country and whatnot. There's a lot of layers to unpack as well that, yeah, at least as it pertains through the lens of my immigrant parents, that part I don't have access to anymore. So, I'm just kind of, yeah, still trying to muddle through that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I really wanted to ask this question. And I mean, y'all, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing, because I think that there is so much complexity and individualism to how we experience, just even from y'all's answers, these times of year and this holiday season. And I think really my follow-up question to that for each of you, for a couple of different reasons, and I'll lay them out, is when we find ourselves grieving in such an individual way or based on individual experiences, how do we navigate that with the people around us, particularly family? So Jana, like, I'm curious about your perspective looking at young people and their parents or their caregivers navigating grief in different ways and how they can sort of navigate that dynamic. TJ, I'd love to hear from you as well about you. I mean, you run a foundation with your family, honoring family. You talk about family a lot, but I'm sure that you all don't grieve in the exact same way at the exact same time. So how do you navigate that? And Tita, same for you. I'm really curious about generational differences and differences within families that are first generation, second generation, just really living in different worlds almost, and how grief and that is navigated. So that's sort of the framework for each of you, but similar question.
I can hop in about thinking about the kids and the families that we work with, and how, as you mentioned, grief is such a unique experience, and that even within the same family, the person who died is really a different person who died, because the relationship we had with that person can be so different. And so it makes sense that our grief would show up in different ways, because we may be grieving very different aspects of that person or that relationship. And so I think about it's like, as people who are grieving, we often feel pretty insecure or incompetent in our grief. And I say that because it's often a very new, unfamiliar piece, and it takes a while to like acclimate to. This is what grief feels like. This is who I am in this grief world. Here's what I need. Here's what I don't need, right? We're like muddling through that so often. And so as we're feeling maybe some trepidation, we can view how other people are appearing to grieve as a threat to how we are or aren't doing it. And that can come with a whole bunch of judgment about how they are or aren't doing it, because what does that mean about how we are or not doing it? So I see as people kind of grow into their experience with grief, they become more confident in how they're doing grief, and they feel less upset by how other people are doing how other people might be doing it differently. There can be more grace around that. But I think particularly in those early, days, weeks, and even years of grief, there can be a lot of my brother's not grieving, or my sister's doing it the wrong way, or my dad doesn't get it, or just a lot of strife around that. And then at the holidays, I think it's even harder then to talk about those things, because we come in at like, I'm either just going to like knuckle my way through this because we just got to get through it, or we've got to do it in honor of, the person who died loved the holidays. We got to make it perfect for them. So there's going to be a high pressure situation in that. And so I think there can be a lot of, just wondering and worrying about how other people are doing it, and what does that mean about how I am or am not doing it.
Yeah, that's great, Jana. What I would like to contribute is that everyone grieves differently, and there is no right way for one to grieve. And there's two other brothers that went through a very similar situation. I'm not going to say the exact same situation because I'm the youngest, and I had my own struggles where my eldest brother had different types of struggle. It's not fair for any one of us to say he had it the easiest, or at least he was this, or at least he had a long-term girlfriend or whatever, because he still struggles with, the fact that he doesn't feel he got to grieve properly because he had to kind of keep everything together as the eldest brother. So there's all these dynamics that sometimes we don't understand. And I think it's very important that when one is going through grief, that they respect that in some way, that just because you or a family goes through something doesn't mean everyone's experiencing it the same way. And I think it's crucial that family provides that place of space and place of comfort and support without being judgmental. That's, like I said earlier, that's something that was so big for me. I never got pressured or pushed to talk about it or to not talk about it. Luckily for me, whether it was through art, I got to express myself, or my best friend at the time was my dog, and I got to have conversations with my pet, which helped me verbalize and get things out. So I and those conversations, and oftentimes that art was never seen by anyone else. So from the outside, it can look like I'm just bottling everything up, or I'm not going through the process correctly. But the truth of the matter is, I think the best step or the best thing I could advise anyone is just to be there for them, is to be present as much as possible without being too pushy and forceful, because we all grieve differently and we all grieve at our own time. um and another thing I really liked about what Janet was saying was this pressure to make things right, or to do something at a collective moment, at a Thanksgiving dinner, or at a Christmas birthday or a Christmas party, or at a birthday party. I think it's very dangerous, when things are forced. It can feel contrived and feel and be what's the word I want to use? It could be a put off for someone who's trying to grieve, and I think just being there is the most important thing. It's just to hug someone and say, do you need anything? Or how are you today? Just those simple, non-intrusive phrases or questions can go a long way. Um, but yeah, it's a work in progress, and that's another thing. It's not one of those things that you graduate from or you completely get over. As I said, I still go through moments where I space out and think about my mother or my uncle, and that's just my new reality. It doesn't mean my life isn't great. It doesn't mean I'm not blessed. It doesn't mean I'm not grateful. It's just a reality. And I think if we can understand that and support our loved ones, that's the best approach to have.
I just want to jump in and say I really appreciate what both of you are saying about, particularly when it comes to any holiday, commemorative situation, birthday, etc. I remember the first year when we celebrated Christmas after my mom died in October. So, 2 months later, we were having Christmas dinner. And I remember we were all sitting at the table and having a really nice dinner. And we all stopped and we were like, are we allowed to be this happy right now? Like, are we allowed to enjoy this food this much right now? Like, oh, wait, I'm going to
Mhm.
say something like kind of sad just to take it off the list because we're having a meal and mom's not here. But I think it was one of the first moments where, getting that permission here tonight, and then also just like remembering and forcing myself to remember really that, like you said, it is going to be different year to year, holiday to holiday, moment to moment. And what I need in that moment, if it is joy, I'm going to take that moment for joy. If it
That's
is
right.
to commemorate someone, I'm going to do it and I'll have my tears. And I think it's really important, I know, for me to remember that. And I appreciate just having that spoken here tonight. So thank
Yeah.
you.
I think a lot of it really, because grief is so individual, because it changes every day. And what might arise on a day-to-day basis can be so just vastly different. I think that an aspect that we're really just not very good at, I think, as a society, is just this notion of like self-compassion and grace. We can hold that for other people, but why it's harder to do it for ourselves, I don't know. But I would just really like to see like I don't know, maybe like a fundamental shift somehow, where we might start to practice that a little bit more, and like really develop really develop that. I don't know if it's a skill or capacity or what, but in terms of yeah, just allowing ourselves a bit of grace and understanding that you know, there is no perfection, and certainly not in grief. I mean, come on. Okay. So like this notion of like comparing this to that or whatnot is like, no, just like leave that at the door. You know, come in as you are. And I think like everyone's saying here, it's like it's just gonna show up. You're gonna show up however that is. You know, and if we can all just perhaps, yeah, just kind of give each other, take a pause and give each other a moment, that might actually, you know, just that might be like what we need. um I have two teenagers, and I would have to say that in my grief, one of the things that I've actually kind of promised myself is that for whatever I'm feeling or however I'm being, I'm going to let it be, and I'm not going to hide it from my kids. um, that's kind of been the way that I've parented. So that it shows up that way for me in terms of grief is consistent. But I want them to see, you know, it is okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay. I mean, it's okay to be like whatever. And even yesterday, I was just kind of sitting and having a moment of missing my parents, but also being in the flip side of that in terms of gratitude, for, you know, being able to take the breath, for, the gratitude to be able to pause, you know, to think of them. And my son was looking at me and he saw that I was just a bit sad, and he came over and all he did was he just gave me a hug. And that was it, you know. And it was just beautiful. And so I'm kind of also hoping that maybe in terms of you know, kids, like they're so much smarter than we are, and we can also learn from them. You know, and maybe take some of like their innocence and their ability to emote and to express and kind of just be in the moment, and maybe we can take that too.
TJ, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah. You know, there's a
Oh,
couple of things that if I could chime in, I'd love to say, because it's something that we talk about on our show all the time, is this our society, in my opinion. I do think it's a capacity that we have to develop as a society. I think our society does us no favors, because from the time we're, you know, babies, we're celebrating winners, and we have a picture of a loser. Of if you lose a championship game, they're slouched, they're sad, they're depressed. They're, you know, after the Super Bowl, we always ask the winning quarterback, where are you going? And it's the happiest place on earth they're going to, you know. So the losers are always embarrassed and shunned. And I see a question in the chat about feeling guilty celebrating, you know, an event, or how to wrap your head around joy and grief. I think it starts there. We have to do a better job of celebrating losing, and celebrating just existing and trying your best, or just making the best out of a situation. That is something that I hope one day will happen, and I feel like we're slowly going in the right direction. But I think that's personally the biggest issue, is that we don't know how to lose. Whether it's a sport event, whether it's a competition, or whether it's a loss of a loved one, we're not really trained on how to lose and celebrate losing, and see the positivity in losing as a society. So until that happens, I think that we're going to be in this situation where people feel guilty for being happy after a loss. You know, and it shouldn't be that way, because all of our, if anyone who's lost someone, your loved one would want you happy. We all know that. You know, I know my mother, my uncle would want me to be the happiest I can be on Christmas Day or on Thanksgiving Day. So why do I feel this guilt? I think it's because we struggle with that, with how to handle loss, and we have to get better at doing that.
I have another question. Thank you for referencing that question in the chat. And Tina and Jenna, if you have anything to say, thank you, TJ. But the question was, did any of you find that you felt guilty for celebrating? How do you wrap your head around joy and grief? So that was the question. I think guilt is a word and a topic that comes up a lot when it comes to grief. Particularly when, like you were saying, we compare ourselves to other people and how they're grieving, whether it be a sibling or a parent or just someone in our community. So my next question is, I'm curious about whether y'all have personal experience or experience with clients, community, anecdotally, et cetera, about how people can manage grief and family dynamics when their family is not necessarily a safe place, a comfortable place, or a positive place to turn. I think that, you know, many of us have maybe the privilege of being able to be open and honest with our families, and many of us do not. So for anyone who sort of needs to hear tonight, what do I do when I show up on that Thursday or that Friday in a couple of weeks for the holidays and I can't talk about what's wrong, or I'm encouraged to shut it down? Yeah, I'd love to hear from any of you about that.
One thing, Jana, I feel like I'm talking so much. Jana, you go ahead, and then I'll follow you.
Okay. This is such a tough question, Elisa. And I was just checking. I'm like, okay, we got like 7 minutes to get like the hour and a half
Sorry.
covered. So two things come to mind for me. I think about putting in like a contingency plan. So if you walk into your family dynamic knowing these are my needs, and these are the needs that are likely not to get met. Like, I just know this about myself. I know this about my family. Who and what can I be turning to have some of those needs met? So I have like an insurance policy heading into this family thing. So, okay, I know that my aunt's got this super cute cat. And if I need to take a break, I can go pet the cat. That's going to help me soothe my nervous system. I've got my best bud on speed dial. And if I need to step out and call them, I set that up with them ahead of time. Like, hey, if I send you an SOS text, can you please pick up? Or I say to my family dynamic ahead of time, like, exercise is super important to me. So every morning you're not going to see me for an hour because I've got to go do this. And I'm going to schedule that in. Let me know what the plan is, so I know what time to head out the door to get my exercise in, or whatever it might be. So I really think about like, what's my personal safety plan walking into this? And then I drop a little deeper and think like, what do I value? Like, what are my values heading into this dynamic? If because of the grief I've experienced, I do value continuing relationships with people, even if those relationships are really complicated and challenging right now, but underneath all that, I really value maintaining some type of connection. Then when things get heated, I can come back to that. Remember, I'm trying to make some kind of connection. It might not be the connection I want, but some thread. What can we find to talk about? Oh, did you see that bird? You know, like something sort of neutral to come back to. So I think about personal safety insurance plan. And also like, what am I valuing here? How can I come back to ground myself in that? So that's my brief answer. Over to you, TJ.
I think that's a perfect answer, to be honest. The only thing I would add to it is just to not put the pressure on making everything perfect. In addition is to look out for communities. That we're so lucky to live in today's day and age with technology, that there's Facebook groups out there for pretty much almost everything a lot of people are going through. We have our own Facebook group where people chime in with similar situations. I have to go to this family event, they don't even accept me, da 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 da. And there's a whole support system out there that can encourage you and be a safe place for you to express yourself. So that would be the only thing, because I completely agree with what you said, Jen. I think it's great advice. The only other thing is for today's youngsters out there to maybe look into some type of group community where you can express yourself, because the worst thing you can do is just keep it all inside and not do anything.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was frozen there for a moment, but no, I completely agree. And I think that in terms of grief, I mean, there is sadness, and I think oftentimes the counterpoint to that, as we talk about it as a society, often tends to be like remembrance and love. But with grief, we know that it's very complicated, and there can be other things, other feelings that arise, like anger, shame, guilt, you know, a number of things. And so I feel like in terms of managing family dynamics, what any one person may be holding at any given time, is certainly very individual. And so I think, like Jana had said, that in terms of understanding what do I need and where are my boundaries, that's just something that's really important. And yes, there are just various and numerous kinds of supports. And so in terms of, again, understanding really like, in terms of like that fundamental, like, what do I need? It's possible to be able to identify what that is. And I think really, if it's possible for someone to also maybe detach from this notion of the outcome has to be this, it has to be like a perfectly cooked turkey, or it has to be, it has to look this way, then that can also, again, just take the pressure off and maybe, again, just allow for a little bit more space for whatever arises to just be.
Thank you. Those, I think, are just such a good mix of practical things to do. I remember I wrote an article about just like how to navigate the holidays the year after my mom died. And one of the things that I put on the list that I was doing was like, I put a thing on my phone that I can go watch in the bathroom for 5 minutes. And I know it's there. I know it's on my phone. I know it's the thing that's going to cheer me up. And if I need to go be alone at a holiday party when there's 100 people outside, I will get these 5 minutes and I'm prepared. So like, I think having that plan and knowing that things could go a little sideways or that you're going to need some space for yourself can be incredibly important. And at the same time, I think also compassion with yourself, compassion with the people around you. Learning as you go with these situations is really important. So I told y'all 45 minutes was going to go by real quick. I think what I want to leave everyone with tonight is I'd love to have each of you just share something short and sweet. We're going into the next couple of weeks. What is something that you would want to share with people just to say, remember this as you navigate the rest of the year, while you're seeing family, while you're in community, while you're navigating whatever it is that you're experiencing, like just remember this. So I'll have all of you share and then we'll close out for the night.
I'll start. If there's something that I'd like for people to remember is, again, be kind to yourself and just know that wherever you are and whatever's going on, that you're enough in whatever is the situation, you've got it. And yeah, just take a moment and take a pause and be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I would add that just to remember there's no right and wrong way to go through what you're feeling or what you're experiencing. It's all okay. The other thing I would add is, and this may sound odd, but is to be thankful. Practice your gratitude. That's something that's really been able to help me. It can reframe how you're thinking at certain situations, because if you're really down, it can lead to more negative thoughts and more negative thoughts, and it could be a slippery slope. So if we can find a way to stop that momentum and just be thankful for the simple things of what we do have, it does somehow give us some type of strength and support to get through our most challenging times.
I think I would share that grief is wildly unpredictable. So don't forget that it's totally unpredictable. And because it's so unpredictable, we really try to control it. Like, we're just like, we're going to make this grief do what we want it to do. And I'm going to do what I need to do. And everyone else is going to do what I need them to do. And it rarely works out that way. And so just to not be surprised when grief does what grief does. And especially I'm thinking of folks who are heading into maybe their second or third holiday season. If you've gotten through the first, you might've been like, phew, I did it. This one's definitely going to be easier, right? And oftentimes the second, the third, the fourth feel even harder. And also one last little reminder is like the lead up sometimes is more intense than the actual occurrence. And I think that catches people off guard. And I think it goes back to that controlling, because we spend the lead up being like, ooh, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna control this. And so I think a lot about it. And then it happens and it's like, oh, it just unfolded the way it was going to. And I already expended all of my energy worrying about it in the lead up. And so if you fall into the lead up category, you haven't done it wrong. So that's what I would offer as a reminder.
Thank you all. That was all I needed to hear all that. So thank you.
Uh-huh.
Like, why is
Thank
this week
you.
so hard? And I'm like, oh, because tomorrow's coming and it's probably going to be okay. We'll sit on the couch. So thank you all for this tonight. We are going to put everyone's links again in the chat. This will be going around after with information around all of these offerings. And I also will get that email out pretty quickly because I'm going to share some additional resources, particularly spaces for people to gather at this time of year in the next like 6 weeks that are grief support around a lot of different areas, particularly in the US. So I will share those resources in case anybody is like, oh, I really like the idea of going outside of my family to get support. I'll do my best to equip everyone with that. So thank you again to my guests tonight. I told you before this started that I needed a little pick me up, and I'm like, oh, this feels good.
Uh-huh.
So thank you for
Thank you
this.
for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jillian, in the background, as always, rocking it. And thank you everyone for joining. We have another event next week. Grief Support, the cooking edition. So we'll be talking about food, cooking, commemorating loved ones, and just people in our lives through recipes. And then in December, we'll host an event, and then the year will be over and we will all be taking a break. So yeah, thank you all again. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.